Bob Garfield is the co-host of On the Media, which, as Gina said, was one of the first podcasts that was put into the ecosystem when they became podcasts. But he's also the host of Audible's Genius Dialogues, and of course, many of you remember many years of columns of advertising criticism at Ad Age and also at MediaPost. He also founded the Media Future Summit, which meets every year and will again in November. We're going to be at Wharton or at Annenberg this time? Annenberg. For many years, co-hosted with Wharton as well as MediaPost. This year will be at Annenberg in Philadelphia. We're going to talk a little bit about that as well. One of the reasons why Bob is here, in addition to being a longtime friend of MediaPost, is that he has always been remarkably prescient when it's come to understanding media future. And in fact, I want to start with a couple of books that he wrote a number of years ago, because I think they remain relevant now. And getting an update on some of his views about where media was headed several years ago, I think is especially important and relevant now. The Chaos Scenario was one of your early books about the media future. And in it, I took, and I know you'll correct me if I'm wrong, is that one of the major themes here is that we were quickly moving away from that century-long era of mass media and also mass marketing into an era of micromedia and micro-marketing. I want a sort of a bit of an update on where you see we are in that process, especially at least at the top line. It looks as if the internet is following some of the same patterns that we saw established in 2 centuries of communications towards conglomeration, centralization of power. We're seeing, instead of diffusion, we're seeing roll-ups of companies, some of the smaller companies being bought up. The response to the chaos seems to be get more scale, try to retrieve a sense of scale, and a duopoly, the likes of which we've never seen before. So have at it.
Just last night, you were making fun of me.
That's right.
About my interview questions
That's
and
right.
On the Media being too long. Are we out of time?
No.
Okay, yeah, so...
Short answer, please.
Yeah, sure. There was before and there was after. There was before, which was the mass media world, which was not a century long, it was 3 centuries long. And it was mass audience and free or subsidized content and an avenue into people's lives for advertisers. And it was a perfect 3-way symbiosis, and it was magnificent, and it lasted for an eon in commercial time. And it actually seemed like it was some sort of guarantee that it was immutable, that it was going to be forever, this cornucopia, only it turned out to have just been a 3-century-long accident of history. It had barriers of entry, it had offered value for all 3 parties in the transaction. It was magnificent. Now, there were some issues attached to it, and this had to do with the kind of, it was a series of local monopolies all over the world, distributed all over the world, and because the barriers of entry were so great, there was not much competition, the margins were unbelievable in the 30 and 40% range on average, and customers got a wide variety of news and entertainment for nothing or next to nothing. It was magnificent, only it stopped. The digital era just said, yeah, that's not going to work anymore. Barriers of entry went from the billions to $0, or the price of an iPhone, and ad avoidance became not just possible, but the default consumer behavior. And fragmentation destroyed the supply and demand that is immutable, the law of supply and demand that girded the magnificent media economy. So that was just obliterated virtually overnight. So Chaos Scenario, which was started with a series of articles on Ad Age about 15 years ago, just looked at this is long before YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, these gigantic social media platforms. It was before any of that, but it wasn't before there were a drazillion different websites dividing our attention into a drazillion little pieces, and obviously things were fixing to change. Now, to get to the substance of your question, in the latter part of that 300-year span, there had been a tremendous amount of consolidation. And there were scholars who were very, very worried that media consolidation, media concentration, was antithetical to democracy because of the hegemony of ideas, and a handful of media companies were able to sort of dictate the debate and the agenda for the whole world, and that was deemed anti-democratic. Now comes this internet, which gives us a playground for an infinite number of ideas. The marketplace of ideas, like the marketplace, the economic marketplace itself, was supposed to expand and flourish. Kumbaya. And no, it hasn't worked out that way. Who would have thought that the internet would destroy the business model for media? And I don't mean harm. I don't mean disrupt. I mean destroy. And also, whoever imagined that the hegemony of media concentration would get by several orders of magnitude worse, where it now resides in the duopoly of Google and Facebook. So the democratic pipe dream of the internet has proven to be just that. And the filter bubbles that are the consequence of human nature and algorithmic content serving and their effect on the body politic have proven that it was not quite, and by the way, the destruction of many media brands and the unbelievable harm to journalism have shown that the brave new world is more cowardly than we were ever led to believe.
And the chaos, the actual chaos scenario ensues when, in your original vision, the old media structures collapse, and the new media structures are not in a position, either ethically, financially, to support what was lost. And I guess in this case, it's journalism.
Yeah. Now,
is that where we are now, where we're in between?
So. No, I wrote this stuff a long time ago.
I know, but I think it's.
Some of it was naive. You know, it was prescient, but there were some real howlers in there when you see a kind of a year 2000 notion of what the future is going to look like. I didn't mention the flying cars, but they were in the back of my mind. Right. And so some of it's adorable, the supposing that I did, but the chaos, as I described it way back when, was the idea that the old model will collapse and the new model will not be built out in order to preserve all of that we need for media, particularly journalism. Well, the new economy has been built out. It's just horrible. It's filled with waste and extraordinary, unimaginable amounts of waste in the billions and billions and billions of dollars. Huge tech stacks that in the name of getting a little more efficiency or data matching for you all has slowed down the process and sucked billions of dollars out of the system. And the actual journalism, which is my greatest interest, has been savaged by this. The number of journalistic employees at these trizillion companies that exist all around the globe is approximately half of what it was 15 years ago. And the resources that are brought to bear for journalism are dramatically lower. There is no profitability in the newspaper business. In fact, there's no profitability in the media business at all. It's all in the duopoly. So, and truthfully, I host this Media Future Summit looking for ethical, sustainable future somewhere, somehow. And while I have a few ideas at the margins, I don't see it happening.
You don't see it happening.
No.
You don't see public funding or the sort of the micro funding of some of the things that we've seen here, and from ProPublica, from VT Digger, from the Voice of San Diego. You don't see hope at the margins for sort of a self-funding from the local level?
I love the VT Digger, and I love Voice of San Diego, and I love ProPublica, and on a national level in the case of ProPublica, and in a local level in the case of VT Digger and Voice of San Diego and a few others. There's an outfit in Batavia, New York that does remarkable work, but these are unicorns, not gigantic unicorns that are going to make money for VCs, but they're rare beasts. And they are not extremely profitable, and the audiences they serve are tiny. We have a nation of $320 million, and virtually nobody is getting their state houses covered. Virtually nobody is getting their courthouses covered. Virtually nobody is getting their school boards covered. And there's a lot of journalism going on. Most of it's focused at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. We don't even cover our Congress to any degree. The Congress. And it is a yawning gap in journalism's fundamental role, which is to be a watchdog of the democracy. And as we have seen, the democracy is suffering. In a recent World Values Survey, which is a 30-year-long tracking study, the percentage of Americans who believed that democracy was the only acceptable form of government was what? Perhaps I can help. 25. 75% of Americans polled believe that, yeah, something else will be fine. The military wants to take over if an incompetent government, okay. Now, that's terrifying. Trust in institutions, governmental institutions, the media, and big business, small business, it's been tracking downward. In the last 2 years, it has been plummeting. It's the reverse hockey stick. We are in a crisis, and it is directly tied to the collapse of the media economy. And while something like this is great, figure out how at the margins to increase a little profitability, to get a little more reach, to improve your CPMs, to join your data sets, to get a better idea of the audience, to bring more value to the audience, that's all great. But if you look at the big picture.
Okay, thanks for bringing us up. Okay, I'm going to go back to your books because I think that you were seeing part of the answer, or you were struggling towards the answer back then, and that was a theme that runs through two books, the Chaos Scenario, but also Can't Buy Me Like, which is sort of where he looked at and advised brands on how to engage this new digital universe. And the through theme there was listen. And in fact, in one of the books, I think in the media book, you actually said what media companies need to do is institutionalize listening. And that's where the passion lies. That's where we make contact again with whatever democratic support there might be for institutions and faith in institutions. Where are we now in that? Has anybody institutionalized listening in an effective way that's tapping into both that energy and maybe that funding?
I think everybody tries. I mean, I think people got the message, not from me, because I only sold 11 copies of that book. Aunt Betty Jane, thank God, she got 6 of them. Listening was not an idea, a notion that I had. It is just a reality. We, whether we like it or not, we are living all in glass houses, in institutions, whether businesses or governmental bodies that used to operate behind this fortress of both impregnable and what's the word opposite of transparent? Opaque. Fortresses of opacity. Now everything they did was common currency on the internet. That was actually one of the great democratizing aspects of the internet that has held its promise. And as a consequence, since we cannot hide what we are as businesses, as brands, because everything that we do, good or bad, the whole world knows about it in a New York Minute. We can't dictate the conversation. We can't send out brand messages and slogans and expect to persuade people about who we are. The public decides who we are as a brand. So it seemed to me to be insane to try to be so, to have such hubris as to think that United Airlines, which has spent, I looked into this, you know, the George Gershwin campaign with the Rhapsody in Blue, Rhapsody in Blue, all these gorgeous pictures of the planes and United, friendly skies of United. They spend, as of 2017, $37 fucktillion trying to tell us what a beautiful experience the United is. But then the videos show up of people being dragged down the aisles, dogs falling out dead from the overheads by the dozens. you cannot dictate your image. And so that was the premise of the book. And whether people like it or not, I mean, it's happening. And those who have adjusted well. And those who think that they can still slogan their way into the consumers' hearts and minds have failed miserably.
Right, and you recommended at the time, and I think it still holds true, and we saw it, I think, yesterday in Tammy's presentation from National Geographic and others about where brands need to head. I'm sorry, I'm going to quote you directly because I think it was one of the best quotes from the second book. There is a human way that happily converges with present reality. Now marketers can and must define their brands, not by ads, press releases, slogans, coupons, sponsorships, and even product offerings, but by their core purpose.
Yeah, and it's actually come up a lot during this summit, the notion of not viewing content as a commodity, but of bringing value to your audiences. And the audiences look like, sometimes they think like you think they're just numbers and curves on your dashboards, but no, they're human beings, and they have a relationship with you. And they will respond to you more if they have a feeling that your values as a brand align with their values, with your interests as a brand align with their interests. Gina was talking about the toothbrushing app. I mean, I think that's a pretty classic example of a brand that sells overpriced toothpaste and toothbrushes to people saying, well, we can tell them how great our toothpaste is, and we can tell them how functional our Oral-B medium bristle toothbrush is, but why don't we figure out what they need? And what they need is for their kids to brush their damn teeth. Mm-hmm. And which was puzzling about kids, because why did they spend more time avoiding toothbrushing and more effort than the actual toothbrushing process itself? The investment into tricking your parents into thinking that you have brushed your teeth is far greater. Mm-hmm. And where's the ROI on that investment? Also, why don't they want to fucking go to sleep at night? I don't get that. But perhaps I digress. So yeah, that's great example of meeting your audience, the group formerly known as the customer, where they live.
Right. And I want to get to that because I think both of your books, and I think the vision that you had, which still holds true and is the through line here, is that you were telling both media and advertising to do essentially the same thing, which is start listening, have meaning and purpose in people's everyday lives, strive for some kind of authenticity, and develop real relationships. How do those two strands come together in terms of because we used to rely on interruptive advertising where the media gathered the audiences, the ads supported it, came in, interrupted for a second, pulled back out. How do those, as we start moving towards both media and advertising, moving towards a more purpose-based, relationship-based, what forms of both media and advertising make sense there so that the two work together and finance one another and support one another?
Well, I mean, I don't want to it's blasphemy. It's anathema for me to say this, but I think you can start by taking the advertising element out of it. Advertising has always worked because it brings the brand name to it. It creates awareness, and sometimes it motivates people to act, especially if there's a particular value proposition. But mostly it's avoided. Vast amount of it, maybe half, is never seen by human eyes. And it does intend, for the most part, to try to do what I just got done saying you can't do, which is to persuade people that you're special, because you're not special. What we need is new mechanisms, and these summits are all about finding those new mechanisms for other touch points and other ways of building a following, cultivating a following among people with converging interests and values. And I don't necessarily think advertising is the best way to do that. It's certainly fraught as a business proposition. And so, I don't think the internet and social media have yet quite found that sweet spot, which should be there for turning customer bases and email addresses and credit card numbers into communities. And the key is to do that. And brands that create communities prosper, and brands that push out ad messages as measured in CPMs don't prosper as well. And I guess we need to do something about that.
Well, let me suggest that your through lines actually point towards both media and marketing becoming more fragmented and more partisan rather than less partisan.
Partisan.
We went through a century, especially of mass electronic media, that sort of that valorized impartiality, and for a lot of reasons, economic reasons, as well as the fact that there were essential monopolies of media. But now, as we move into fragmentation, as we move towards these more relationship-based media, we start seeing, we're a much more fragmented country than maybe we ever wanted to believe we were. We're much more partisan and pitched against one another, and maybe both the media and the marketing should be following suit if we're listening to those users. Okay,
so the one thing that was good about the hegemony of the old days is that this handful of media tycoons who really dominated the agenda, the political, the conversational agenda, the cultural agenda, they had a relatively narrow but also relatively broad area of consent that you could discuss this stuff, and then there was stuff out on the fringes that was just simply not welcome. You're not going to read too much in Time magazine about fringe ideas or in the New York Times or on CBS. I mean, when Walter Cronkite came out sort of vaguely against the war, the world did not know how to handle that. Okay, so that was then. Now we got the internet and the democracy of ideas, but the law of unintended consequences created something else, and it's algorithmically fed content. And the consequence of algorithmically fed content is the creation of these filter bubbles. So all of this extreme content that has not been filtered out by the hegemons is now freely available. Those who consume it get more and more and more of it. And the consequence is they live in a world of self-validation. And their Facebook feeds are, whether you're on the left or on the right, sort of masturbatory. You keep reading the same thing because it makes you feel good. Maybe it makes you feel good by making you feel angry, but it makes you feel good. It validates your worldview. It tells you, you go, guy, you are right. And fill in the blank, some other is horrible. And it has been catastrophic for the democracy. And I'm not talking about Trumpism. I believe that Trumpism is not the problem. I think it is a symptom of a 50-year-long culture war that was heavily, heavily, heavily cultivated in the 15 years of the internet. And now the apotheosis of the filter bubble comes in the Google and Facebook algorithms. So you can almost not tear yourself out of a very narrow partisan bubble. So yeah, it's terrible, but there are solutions.
That's called a setup.
What?
Out of Great Depression comes great optimism. You are working on an initiative called the Purple Project that I think is trying to address some of this.
Well, as a matter of fact, I am. You're kind to mention that.
And I wanted to lead towards that. I didn't know that you were going to bring us down to such a hole of depression that we would have to dig ourselves out this much. But tell us about the Purple Project and your idea and the way in which you see it as a kind of intervention in this.
Yes, it may or may not be called. The working name is the Purple Project, and it's still theoretically in stealth. It has not been announced. But a group of like-minded people, not politically like-minded people, but people desperate about the state of our democracy, have formed a small group that has turned into a very significant coalition and will grow still more. And by the time it's announced, will be sort of, to use the Upworthy term, jaw-dropping. And the notion is that it's completely nonpartisan, and all it wishes to do, in view of things like that World Values Survey result of 25% of Americans believing democracy is the only path, to remind people what democracy actually is, what the American government actually is, what the Bill of Rights actually is. It's only 454 words or something. It's not that hard to get your head around. to explain what the bureaucracy does, to explain where journalism, fake news, actually where journalism comes from. How does it work? And to do this in November of 2019, in every conceivable media channel. You won't be able to look at your phone, your television. You won't be able to listen to a podcast. You won't be able to open your freaking fridge, I hope, without seeing the Purple Project for Democracy. And it is a civic and media literacy initiative. In fact, it is the world's largest, will be, I hope, the world's largest concentrated media campaign ever undertaken on any subject anywhere. But it won't be pedagogy, although there will be a huge, actually, element in the schools. But it will be storytelling. And we're going to find ways to flesh out with real stories, historical and contemporary, about what is the Miranda warning again? Why is that a thing? Why are we coddling criminals? Or, what is the First Amendment and where does the law come from? No, I don't mean in the legislatures. I mean, how do the courts get to determine laws? And we will look at cases and with gripping, dramatic stories involving real flesh and blood human beings, with the notion of getting people excited in truth, justice, and the American way. These used to be shared values, but we are so distrustful, we're so complacent, we're so cynical. We've forgotten exactly what Americanness means. And the idea is, again, through storytelling, to get people charged up about this great American experiment. Is it going to dislodge people from their filter bubbles? Most probably not. But it cannot help but start a national conversation, at least for us to agree about core American values. And if we can be ubiquitous, if we can take those bazillions of fragments and get enough critical mass to get this so that this storytelling in country music and hip-hop music and on your streaming video that is truly ubiquitous, I believe we have the ability to recharge the American way. And I hope at some point when I come hat in hand looking for your support as a content partner in all of this, that you'll be there at the ready to help out.
Questions? Any questions? Bill?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, hi, Bill Ullman, Smithsonian. Great talk, really uplifting, thanks. I think it was Adlai Stevenson who said, in a democracy, people get the government they deserve. And I think in some ways, I'm wondering how that applies to media. I think in some ways, we get the media we deserve, meaning we're part of the problem as much as a victim of the collapse that you talk about. And I'm wondering, maybe in your Purple Project you're doing that. Is there something that individuals are at fault for, first of all, because we're the ones who are making all this happen. We're the consumers of this media. Facebook isn't forcing me to go on Facebook. And also, is there something we can do as publishers and to help turn that around?
So first, yes. Our current predicament is the convergence of human nature and algorithmically fed content that has created this filter bubble catastrophe. The human nature being that nobody likes to be told they're wrong. They prefer to be told they're right. In fact, they prefer to be told you are a genius. You have rare insight, which is what this endless cycle of self-validating content does. So yeah, that's a problem. What publishers can do? Well, what publishers have always been able to do. There's so much talk about censorship and the First Amendment. The First Amendment is a relationship between the government and its citizens. The government is not allowed to intervene in free speech or free press. But publishers have always been gatekeepers. Even in the worst days of the hegemons, when it looked like Gannett and Disney were going to own everything, they served the role of deciding what they just didn't want to host. And now Facebook, among its many sins, and there are many, has completely abdicated, under this flimsy pretext of not being a publisher, has completely abdicated its role as a gatekeeper, as a guardian of what appears on its platform. And part of this has to do with, I guess, the Digital Millennial Copyright Act and their ability to be held harmless for content that appears on their site, lest they be confused as a publisher. Their business model depends on them not intervening, but that's baloney. Publishers are responsible for what they host, and as a consequence, they have the responsibility to make sure that they don't become part of the problem. But one of the consequences of looking at your audiences as images on your dashboards is that you forget that there are consequences to what you host. And not to blame the media for the political polarization that we're in the middle of. Again, this is a long historical arc, and human nature is very much at play, and the culture wars have been raging for 60 years. So it's not as though we invented this problem, but we certainly have done far too little to protect the free speech which we claim to be operating under.
We have another one here.
Hey, Marcus Woody with Source Media. How do you tamp down the inevitable politicization of the Purple Project? You know that the finger pointing is going to come away. As soon as you guys lean too far left, too far right, it's going to become an attack weapon for either side. So how do you sort of keep it out of the political stream and keep it more in the public conscience?
It's interesting. I was just asking George Soros and Hillary that the other day. Now, you're right. First of all, it is going to happen. We will be accused of some sort of brainwashing. But the main way we're doing it is the very first thing is to build out this coalition. And when you see the logos that appear under the Purple Project Coalition, you will immediately notice that it's even that it's not just the usual suspects from the left, the Birkenstock wearing, NPR listening, white wine sipping, kale eating, Eastern, coastal liberals. It will be actually, it'll be a little top-heavy with not usual suspects, which means institutions and individuals from the political right, from big business, from small business, from faith-based institutions, from presidential libraries, that it will be impossible to mistake it for some sort of liberal initiative. Now,
do you envision that taking shape in a diversity of content types? So, like, not just talking about the First Amendment, but what are the origins of the real origins of the Second Amendment?
Yes,
I mean, maybe so it's more a diversity than everybody agreeing on. This is how we talk about the First Amendment.
Well, all right. So, will we look at I'm not dictating content decisions. There's the building of the coalition, and then there's the collaboration with content partners, who, under the general theme, we strike a deal with with NPR. And NPR will decide what the content is under the broad theme of civic and media literacy and re-engaging people in the political process, but also in understanding the basics of the government. And beyond that, we're not going to tell them what to do. If another content partner says, the Heller case, which Supreme Court decision which found that we do have the right to own handguns even in the District of Columbia, where there are gun control laws, where did that come from? How did that become the law of the land? We're not going to cherry pick stuff that liberals like. It's not going to be like, well, here's why Roe v. Wade is the law of the land. No, we're not. I rather expect us to do the opposite, because the fundaments of the values that we're describing here aren't about individual laws or individual news stories or individual anything. It's about the structure of American democracy that makes this all happen. And I don't really care what examples we use, as long as they're dramatic, as long as they're human, as long as they're gripping. And so, no, we're not going to have some sort of Trojan horse for liberal-friendly content that we're going to sneak in past this coalition, this broad-based coalition. Not at all. In fact, we're not even going to have a say in what gets produced.
Well, Bob is going to be here for the next, throughout today and tomorrow, so you can talk to him more about it then. Bob, Godspeed.
Thank you very much,
Thanks
Steve.
very much,
Thank
Bob.
you.